What's up, HSM? Scott here, and I am coming to you from the campus of Cal State Fullerton. Some of you know I actually moved to Fullerton about 6 months ago. I actually am from Chicago, and that pertains to today because this college campus reminds me of a little story that kind of relates to what we're going to be talking about today. Now, for the last few weeks, we've been in this series where we're talking about perseverance, and we're talking about how do you get through tough times? How do you stay encouraged when it feels like things around you are kind of falling apart? And I want to be straight honest with you guys from the very beginning. Sometimes when I hear people talk about this kind of stuff, or I read a blog, or I listen to a podcast, it feels like whoever is talking sometimes is coming from such a position of strength that they've never struggled with it, and that they're like an expert on the subject. But I want to be straight with you and tell you guys, I've had some decent days during COVID, but I've actually had some really hard days too, where I think to myself, I don't know how this thing's gonna go. I don't know how it's gonna unfold, and I'm not even sure what my next move should be. But as this thing has gone along, I ran across some verses in scripture that felt so appropriate and so applicable, I started talking to people about them. And I talked to Landon about it so much, Landon finally just said, Scott, why don't you just teach about that at HSM one week, because you seem to be really into these verses. And I said, hey, I'd love to give that a shot. Now the reason I'm on a college campus is because for some of you, your crisis might not have anything to do with COVID. Your hard time might not have anything to do with this virus and what's kind of happened to you. Your crisis might have something to do with a decision you made or a situation you found yourself in that maybe you actually had something to do with. And for me, it brings me back to when I was 19 years old, living in a dorm at Michigan State University with a bunch of my buddies. One day we go down to the mailboxes, and I didn't get a lot of mail, got some credit card applications and some other junk mail. But I open up my mailbox, and there's an envelope from my brother. My brother didn't send me letters. And so I crack open this envelope, and inside the envelope, what falls to the ground is a driver's license. Now, my brother's about to move to Australia. And so I guess he figured he didn't need his driver's license anymore, so he sent it to me. I look at my buddies, though, and I say, I've already got a driver's license. What's my brother doing? And they said, your brother is older than you, and you don't have a driver's license that says you're 21 years old. I thought to myself, oh gosh, this may not end well. Now, you might not believe me, but when I was 19 years old, I didn't drink at all. I hung out with a lot of friends who did, though, and they said, listen, you have the chance to help us with the party that we're gonna throw this weekend. And I thought, oh, I'm not sure how this is gonna work itself out. So we go to the store, and I didn't just buy them a 6-pack, and I didn't just buy a 12-pack, but I actually bought them a couple shopping carts full of beer. I don't have time to tell you the whole story right now, but I'll tell you this, it did not end well. I ended up getting arrested. And like I said, I'll tell you that story some other day, but in that moment, I had my own trouble that I need to find a way to persevere through at that point. Now there's a guy who's way more famous than me who ended up arrested, and his name is Paul, and his story is recorded in scripture. And he writes a letter to a guy named Timothy, and he talks to him about perseverance. And these verses have become to mean so much to me. I want to take a few minutes, and if you can tune in, I think that these verses might be helpful to you as well. So hundreds and hundreds of years ago, Paul writes down these words to Timothy, and they get preserved all this time. And you guys, I'm telling you, I think they're super appropriate for us for right now. And here's what Paul says. He looks at Timothy and he says, but you keep your head in all situations. Let me paraphrase that. I think what he's saying is, Timothy, don't freak out. I don't know about you, but if something's going on around you, do you ever freak out on the inside, but not on the outside? Like someone was looking at you, they wouldn't be able to tell you're freaking out, but you know, on the inside, you're freaking out. Paul's saying to Timothy, you gotta keep your head in all situations. You gotta guard your head. Now, when you were growing up, I don't know if you're a skater or a biker, or if your mom ever said, hey, if you're gonna ride, you gotta wear a helmet. Because you gotta protect your head, you gotta guard your head. And Timothy is saying, you gotta guard your head, you gotta protect your thoughts. That's what you need to do. You need to keep your head in all situations. It's the first thing he says to him. And for me, I've gotta remember that. Got to keep my head. I've got to remind myself that this is going to come my way. And that leads to the next two words. And Paul says, endure hardship. Just those two words. It's like he's speaking to Timothy and saying, you need to expect that hardship is going to come your way. Don't be surprised when trouble happens. You're going to have to endure hardship. Jesus, years before, had said to his followers, in this world, you're going to have trouble. And then he said, but take heart, I've overcome the world. Paul's saying to Timothy, you need to endure hardship. Expect tough times. And when it comes, you got to find a way to batten down the hatches and say, no, I'm going to endure this hardship. I'm going to ride out this storm. I'm going to make it through because I knew hardship was coming, and I'm going to find a way to get through this. Now, the last thing that Paul says to Timothy, it's pretty profound, and it's kind of next level, honestly. It's almost like an AP kind of a class. But if you're a Jesus follower, it's super important. So you might be tempted to tune out at this particular time, but don't, because the last things that Paul's going to say to Timothy, pretty important. Now, the last thing that Paul tells Timothy might surprise you a little bit, that this makes the top directives that he's going to give to him in a time of a crisis. But he says, and I'm going to change translations here because I like the way the New Living Version says this. He says, but work at telling others the good news about Jesus and fully carry out the work of the ministry that God has given you. And I want you to catch that. If you're a Jesus follower, if you know who God is, God has given you a ministry. Now, for some of us, we might think, no, it's only for pastors or for small group leaders or for adults. But if you're a Jesus follower, God's given you a ministry. And what that means is there are people around you who need the kind of kindness that you can provide, even in a pandemic. There are people around you who need someone to lean towards them and care about how they're handling everything that's going on these days. There are even people around you who need the love of Jesus in ways that they may not be experiencing it right now. So hear those words from Paul and carry out the work of the ministry that God has given to you. It's true, in your world right now, there's love that needs to be distributed. There's kindness that can be given. And you have that chance this very week to get outside yourself, for me to get outside of myself, and to carry out the work of the ministry that God has given us. It actually will help me and help you to get a right size on our own situation when we're helping other people. Now, as we finish this up, I just want to say all this stuff that we talk about here at HSM is even better when you can talk about it with someone else. And on the screen is going to appear an email address where you can reach out. If you're not in one of our online small groups, we would love to have you as part of it. We can't gather in person yet, but we can talk about this kind of stuff. And maybe you're so crazy tired of Zoom calls. I know we are too. But this is how we're pulling together and encouraging one another and supporting one another. And if you just reach out to that email address, we'd love to tell you more about it and maybe even get you connected to a group. We think you'd love it, and we'd love to have you. So until next time, keep it up, endure, and we'll see you.